The storm arrived over Lagos like a living force, swallowing the fading daylight sky. Dark clouds rolled in heavily, pressing low over the restless city streets. Rain exploded without warning, drenching everything in violent sheets of silver water. Traffic slowed into chaos as vehicles splashed through flooded roads and honked loudly. Street vendors scrambled desperately to protect their goods beneath thin plastic coverings. Crowds scattered toward shelters, seeking safety from the sudden downpour and roaring wind. Yet one woman remained still beneath a broken pharmacy awning, untouched by urgency around her. Her name was Amara, a young pregnant woman holding her swollen belly tightly for warmth. Her oversized faded sweater clung to her fragile frame, soaked and heavy from constant rain. Cold water dripped from the rusted metal edge above her head without mercy. She was exhausted beyond simple tiredness, carrying a deeper fatigue that lived inside her spirit. Her feet ached from endless walking across the city in search of work and survival. Hunger twisted painfully in her stomach, reminding her she had barely eaten all day. She gently whispered to the unborn child inside her, asking for strength to continue. A small kick answered her, and a faint smile briefly softened her tired face. Across the street, bright restaurants glowed warmly with music, laughter, and wealthy conversations inside. Luxury cars lined the roads as well-dressed couples stepped out under expensive umbrellas. That world felt distant, untouchable, and completely separate from Amara's harsh reality. Just months ago, her life had carried stability, work, and quiet hope for the future. She had worked in a small clothing shop, earning enough to survive modestly each month. She once believed in love deeply, trusting a man named Darius who promised forever. He spoke of marriage, family, and a future built together without fear or doubt. Everything collapsed the moment she revealed her pregnancy and needed him the most. His calls stopped, excuses grew colder, and silence eventually replaced every promise he had made. One night, he looked at her with distance in his eyes and called the baby a mistake. That single word shattered everything she had believed about love and loyalty in life. Soon after, she lost her job, her home, and every remaining piece of stability she had. Now she survived the streets of Lagos alone, carrying life inside her trembling body. Rain soaked through her clothing as she whispered prayers into the dark, pleading for strength. Suddenly, powerful engines echoed through the street as black luxury SUVs arrived at the hotel nearby. The Imperial Grand Hotel stood tall, glowing under lights that reflected wealth and influence. Security guards rushed with umbrellas as well-dressed guests stepped out of the vehicles quickly. Amara barely lifted her eyes, used to seeing worlds she would never enter. Then she noticed a different presence among them, a man stepping out with quiet authority. Damian Cole emerged from the final vehicle, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit. His presence alone shifted attention, even from people accustomed to power and luxury. He was a billionaire businessman known across Nigeria for success, influence, and relentless ambition. Yet tonight he looked different, carrying exhaustion that no amount of wealth could hide. His expression held weight, as though unseen burdens pressed heavily against his shoulders. Hotel staff greeted him with urgency, bowing slightly as he walked toward the entrance. He responded with minimal acknowledgement, focused only on moving forward into the building. Amara watched briefly, then lowered her gaze, believing people like him belonged to another world. Thunder cracked sharply overhead, shaking the air above the flooded city streets. She pulled her thin sweater tighter as cold rain continued falling without pause. Then something small caught her attention near where the luxury vehicles had been parked. A dark object rested against the wet pavement, partially hidden by the rainwater reflections. At first she ignored it, thinking it was nothing worth noticing or caring about. But curiosity pushed her slowly forward, despite pain in her tired and aching body. She stepped carefully across the flooded road, avoiding passing vehicles rushing through water. Kneeling down, she reached for the object and realized it was a very expensive wallet. The black leather still looked refined, even under heavy rain and dim street lighting. Amara looked around cautiously, confirming no one seemed to notice what she had found. Her heartbeat quickened as she opened it slowly, hands trembling from cold and hesitation. Inside, she saw stacks of cash, multiple bank cards, and official identification documents. Her breath caught instantly as she recognized the value of what lay before her. One identification card displayed a name she had just heard moments earlier: Damian Cole. The billionaire she had just seen had lost this wallet without realizing it. Her fingers tightened instinctively around it as thoughts of survival flooded her mind. This could change everything: food, shelter, medical care for her unborn child. For a brief moment, temptation rose quietly, whispering escape from her suffering life. Yet as she stood frozen in the rain, the baby inside her moved again. Another strong kick broke through her thoughts, grounding her in something deeper than desperation. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered softly, questioning what kind of mother she wanted to be. Her own mother's voice echoed in memory, reminding her that integrity must never be abandoned. With trembling hands, she closed the wallet firmly and made her decision without hesitation. She turned toward the Imperial Grand Hotel, determined to return what did not belong to her. Each step felt heavier under the storm, her body weak but her resolve steady. By the time she reached the entrance, luxury and light surrounded her fragile, soaked figure. Guests stared at her with confusion, judgment, and quiet discomfort at her appearance. A security guard stepped forward immediately, blocking her from entering the building. She explained softly that she needed to return something important belonging to a guest inside. The guard dismissed her quickly, assuming she was causing trouble or seeking attention. Her voice grew weaker under pressure, but she insisted she was telling the truth. The situation escalated as people began watching, whispering about the soaked pregnant stranger outside the hotel. Humiliation burned through her chest, but she refused to step away. Then a deep voice broke through the tension, commanding immediate silence from everyone present. Damian Cole himself appeared at the entrance, noticing the disturbance unfolding near the doors. His cold expression shifted slightly as his eyes landed on the woman standing in the rain. She stepped forward slowly and held out the wallet with shaking hands. In that moment, everything around them paused, as billionaire and stranger faced each other under stormlight. Damian Cole stood at the hotel entrance under harsh golden lighting, staring at the woman before him. Rain continued pouring heavily across the marble steps, soaking everything in cold, relentless waves. Amara held the wallet tightly with trembling hands, refusing to lower her gaze despite exhaustion. Her soaked clothing clung to her fragile frame, revealing how weak and tired she truly was. Around them, hotel guests slowed their movements, sensing something unusual unfolding at the entrance doors. Security guards shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware they may have misjudged the situation completely. Damian's eyes narrowed slightly as he reached forward and took the wallet carefully from her hands. He opened it again, checking every detail with sharp focus, confirming nothing had been touched or removed. The silence between them grew heavier as realization settled fully inside his mind. This woman had walked through a violent storm carrying something that could have changed her life. Yet she returned it without hesitation, without expectation, without asking for anything in return. Damian slowly looked up at her again, studying her face more closely this time. He noticed her pale lips, the exhaustion under her eyes, and the way she held her stomach. Only now did he fully see her condition, heavily pregnant, alone, and visibly struggling in the rain. One of the security guards stepped forward quickly, trying to regain control of the situation. "Sir, we already asked her to leave. She was causing disturbance outside the entrance." The words immediately tightened the atmosphere around them. Damian's expression shifted instantly, becoming colder and more controlled than before. He turned his head slowly toward the guard without speaking at first. The silence alone was enough to make the guard step back nervously. Damian finally spoke in a low, dangerous tone that cut through the noise of the storm. "She returned something that belongs to me, and you treated her like a problem." The guard lowered his eyes immediately, realizing the seriousness of his mistake. Amara stood quietly, unsure whether she should remain or step away from the situation. Her body trembled slightly from cold, but she refused to show weakness in her expression. Damian noticed it immediately and removed his suit jacket without hesitation. He stepped forward and gently placed it over her shoulders, covering her from the rain and wind. Amara froze completely, shocked by the unexpected warmth of the gesture. The jacket carried heat and a scent of safety she had almost forgotten existed. She looked up at him uncertainly, unsure how to respond to such kindness. Damian's voice softened slightly, though still carried authority and control. "You walked all the way here in this condition just to return a wallet. Amara nodded slowly, her voice barely audible beneath the sound of rain. It was yours. Simple words, but they struck Damian deeper than anything he had heard in years. Around them, guests continued watching in silence, unsure how the situation would unfold. Damian gestured slightly with his hand, signaling the security guards to step aside. Then he turned back toward Amara again, his expression now more thoughtful than before. "What is your name?" he asked quietly, studying her face carefully. "Amara," she replied, tightening his jacket around her shoulders. Damian repeated the name softly in his mind, as if trying to understand it fully. Another wave of thunder rolled across the sky, shaking the atmosphere around the hotel entrance. Damian looked at her once more, noticing how she struggled to remain steady in the cold. Without speaking further, he made a decision that surprised even the staff standing nearby. He stepped slightly closer and spoke in a calm but firm voice. "Come inside with me." Amara blinked in confusion, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "I just need to return home," she said quietly, stepping back slightly. Damian shook his head once, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Not like this. You need warmth, food, and medical attention." The mention of medical attention made Amara instinctively place a protective hand over her stomach. She hesitated, fear and uncertainty mixing with exhaustion in her eyes. The security guards exchanged uneasy glances, unsure how to react to Damian's decision. One of them stepped forward again cautiously, trying to intervene. "Sir, should we handle this situation differently?" Damian raised a hand immediately, stopping him mid-sentence. "No," he said firmly, "she is coming with me." The words echoed through the entrance, silencing everyone completely. Amara stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in her reality. Just moments ago, she had been invisible in the rain. Now she stood at the center of attention. Damian turned slightly and gestured toward the hotel interior. For a brief moment, Amara looked at the glowing entrance, then back at the storm behind her. Something inside her hesitated, warning her about trusting situations that felt too sudden. But her body was too weak to argue much longer against the cold and exhaustion. Slowly, she took a small step forward, still unsure what choice she was truly making. Damian watched her carefully, noticing every sign of hesitation and fear in her movement. He adjusted his posture slightly, ensuring she felt no pressure or threat from him. The doors of the Imperial Grand Hotel opened fully, revealing a world of light and warmth inside. And as Amara finally crossed the threshold, she unknowingly stepped into a life she could never return from. Amara stepped into the Imperial Grand Hotel with hesitant, uncertain movements. The sudden warmth inside hit her like a wave after the freezing storm outside. Bright golden lights reflected off polished marble floors, creating a world she had never truly entered before. The contrast between the cold rain behind her and the luxury before her felt overwhelming. Her wet slippers made soft sounds as she followed Damian through the vast lobby. Everywhere she looked, she saw wealth, elegance, and people who belonged to another reality. Crystal chandeliers hung high above, like frozen stars glowing in perfect symmetry. Soft piano music filled the air, blending with quiet conversations from wealthy guests seated nearby. Amara kept her head slightly lowered, painfully aware of every glance directed at her. Her soaked clothes and swollen pregnancy made her feel exposed in ways she could not hide. Damian walked beside her without hesitation, as if her presence was completely natural. That alone confused her more than anything else happening around her. A hotel manager quickly approached them with a respectful bow and nervous expression. "Good evening, Mr. Cole. Your meeting with investors is ready upstairs." Damian stopped walking for a moment, but did not look impressed by the reminder. "Cancel it," he said calmly, without raising his voice. The manager blinked in shock, unsure if he had heard correctly. "Sir, the investors are already waiting." "I said cancel it," Damian repeated firmly. The manager immediately stepped back, realizing there would be no further discussion. Amara looked at Damian with confusion, unable to understand his decision. "You cancelled your meeting because of me?" she asked quietly. Damian glanced at her briefly, his expression steady but unreadable. "You look like you are about to collapse." The words were simple, but they carried unexpected concern. Amara lowered her gaze, unsure how to respond to such direct attention. Damian guided her toward a quieter section of the hotel, away from the main entrance. They entered a restaurant space filled with warm lighting and soft background music. Elegant tables were arranged neatly, each decorated with subtle luxury and care. A pianist played gently in the corner, adding calmness to the atmosphere. The moment Amara stepped inside, she felt even more out of place than before. Conversations around her softened as guests noticed her unusual appearance. She could feel the weight of their curiosity and quiet judgment pressing against her. Damian pulled out a chair for her without hesitation. "Sit," he said simply. Amara hesitated, unsure if she belonged anywhere near such a place. But exhaustion forced her to slowly lower herself into the chair. The seat felt softer than anything she had experienced in months. A waiter quickly approached, glancing between Damian and Amara with visible confusion. "Sir, your usual order." "Bring everything fresh," Damian interrupted, then added, "and hot tea." The waiter nodded quickly and disappeared. Within minutes, plates of food began arriving at the table. Rice, chicken, bread, soup, fresh fruit, and warm dishes filled the space before her. Amara stared at everything in disbelief, her stomach tightening with sudden hunger. Damian noticed her reaction, but said nothing at first. "Eat," he said quietly. Amara hesitated for only a moment before hunger overcame her restraint. She began eating slowly at first, trying to maintain some sense of dignity, but within minutes, exhaustion and hunger took over completely. She ate with urgency she could not hide, as if her body had been starved for too long. Damian watched her carefully, but did not interrupt or judge her behavior. Instead, he studied her quietly, noticing every detail about her presence. Despite her situation, there was something gentle and respectful in the way she behaved. She still thanked the waiter every time a new dish was placed before her. That simple act stayed in Damian's mind more than anything else. In his world, people always wanted something, especially from him. But this woman had returned a fortune without hesitation. That fact disturbed him in a way he could not explain. Amara finally slowed down after eating enough to ease her hunger. "I am sorry," she said softly, suddenly embarrassed by how much she had eaten. Damian frowned slightly at her words. "Why are you apologizing for eating?" Amara looked away, unsure how to explain her feelings. "I just have not eaten properly in a while," she admitted quietly. The honesty in her voice changed something in Damian's expression. For a brief moment, he looked away as if processing something deeper. He thought of his late wife and the compassion she once carried so naturally. The silence between them grew heavier, but not uncomfortable. Damian finally spoke again, his voice calmer than before. "What is your name?" "Amara," she replied. Damian repeated it softly, as if memorizing it. He studied her again, noticing the exhaustion in her posture and eyes. Then he asked another question after a short pause. "Where is your family?" Amara's fingers tightened slightly around the cup she was holding. Her voice softened as she answered, "I do not have anyone anymore." Damian listened without interrupting her. The question about the baby's father lingered in the air. Amara hesitated before speaking again, her expression tightening with pain. "He left," she said quietly. Damian's jaw tightened slightly at the answer. He did not ask further, but his expression darkened with quiet anger. Amara looked down, expecting judgment, but none came. Instead, she felt something unfamiliar from him, concern. Damian leaned back slightly in his chair, studying her silently. "You should not be alone like this," he said firmly. Amara gave a small, tired smile. Life does not always give choices. Damian looked at her for a long moment. Despite everything she had endured, she had not become bitter. That realization struck him more deeply than he expected. A soft silence settled again between them. Outside, the storm continued pouring against the hotel windows. Then Damian noticed her wince slightly. "What is wrong?" he asked immediately. Amara shook her head quickly. "Nothing," but he did not believe her. "You are in pain," he said. "It is just my back," she admitted quietly. Damian's expression tightened. "How far along are you?" "Almost 8 months." The answer made him visibly tense. 8 months, and you are outside in this condition," he said. Amara lowered her gaze without responding. Damian looked away briefly, visibly disturbed by the reality of her situation. Without hesitation, he pulled out his phone and made a call. "I need a doctor here immediately," he said firmly. Amara immediately shook her head. "No, that is not necessary. You are not paying." Damian interrupted. She fell silent, overwhelmed by the sudden care she was receiving. Within half an hour, a doctor arrived to examine her quietly in a private room. The results confirmed exhaustion and malnutrition, but the baby was stable. "You need rest," the doctor warned seriously. Amara nodded quietly, absorbing the information. When the doctor left, Damian stood near the window, lost in thought. He turned back toward her after a long silence. "Where are you staying tonight?" Amara hesitated before answering. "Near a closed shop in Ojota." Damian stared at her for a moment, visibly disturbed by her response. Without saying anything else, he made a decision. "You are coming with me," he said firmly. Amara looked up quickly, unsure if she had heard correctly. Before she could respond, Damian continued, "You need safety, food, and proper care." Amara hesitated again, fear and uncertainty rising in her chest. But exhaustion made resistance impossible. Slowly, she nodded. Damian called for arrangements immediately. As they prepared to leave, Amara realized her life had already begun shifting beyond anything she could control, and this was only the beginning of everything that was about to change. Amara sat quietly in the back seat of the luxury car as it moved through the streets of Lagos. The city lights blurred against the rain-covered windows, creating streaks of gold and grey. She kept her hands folded tightly over her stomach, still trying to process everything that had happened. Only hours ago, she was surviving on the streets with no clear future. Now she was sitting in a car owned by one of the richest men in the country. Damian Cole sat beside her, focused on the road ahead in silence. His presence felt calm, controlled, and strangely protective without needing words. Amara stole brief glances at him, unsure how to understand this sudden change in her life. He had offered help without asking for anything in return. That alone made her more nervous than the wealth surrounding her. Outside, the city slowly faded into quieter, more exclusive neighborhoods. Tall gates, wide roads, and massive homes began replacing crowded streets. Amara realized they were entering a world completely separated from the one she knew. Eventually, the car turned into a long private driveway lined with soft lighting. Ahead stood a massive estate, elegant and quiet under the night sky. The Cole mansion rose like something out of a dream, too large to feel real. Amara's breath caught slightly as she looked at it. "This is your home?" she asked softly. Damian nodded once. "Yes." The gates opened slowly, revealing perfectly maintained gardens and glowing pathways. The car stopped near the entrance, and a group of staff immediately stepped forward. They bowed respectfully as Damian stepped out first. Amara hesitated inside the car, suddenly aware of how out of place she felt. Damian noticed her pause and turned slightly. "You can come out," he said calmly. She nodded and carefully stepped onto the driveway. The ground felt solid and expensive beneath her feet, unlike anything she was used to. A female staff member approached quickly, holding an umbrella despite the rain already stopping. "Welcome, sir," she said politely, before glancing at Amara with surprise. Damian spoke firmly. "She is with me." That single sentence changed the atmosphere instantly. The staff member quickly adjusted her tone and stepped aside. Amara followed Damian toward the entrance, her heart beating faster with every step. Inside, the mansion was even more overwhelming than the outside. Marble floors reflected soft, golden lighting from elegant chandeliers above. Every detail looked carefully designed, expensive, and untouched by struggle. Amara slowed down, unsure if she should even continue walking forward. Damian turned slightly and noticed her hesitation again. "You are safe here," he said quietly. Those words made something tighten in her chest. It had been a long time since anyone had said something like that to her. As they walked deeper inside, Amara noticed the emptiness behind the luxury. The house was beautiful, but it felt strangely silent, almost lifeless. Damian led her toward a large sitting area and gestured for her to sit. She obeyed slowly, still unsure of her place in this environment. A housekeeper arrived immediately, waiting for instructions. "Bring warm food and clean clothes," Damian ordered. The housekeeper nodded and left quickly. Amara looked at Damian, confused by everything happening so fast. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. Damian paused for a moment before answering. "Because you need help." Amara looked down, struggling to accept kindness she had not earned in her eyes. I am not used to this, she admitted softly. Neither am I, Damian replied honestly. That answer surprised her. For the first time, she saw something human behind his calm exterior. A man used to control, but not used to emotional connection. Minutes later, food arrived again, simpler but warm and comforting. Amara ate slowly this time, still cautious but grateful. Damian stood near the window, watching the rain begin again outside. You should rest after this, he said. Amara nodded slightly. What about tomorrow, she asked. Damian turned slightly. We will figure it out tomorrow. The uncertainty should have scared her, but instead it felt like the first step towards something new. After she finished eating, a staff member guided her to a guest room. The room was large, warm and softly lit, with a comfortable bed waiting. Amara stood at the doorway for a long moment, unsure if she deserved any of it. Damian's voice came from behind her. Get some sleep. She nodded and slowly stepped inside. The door closed gently behind her, leaving her alone for the first time in hours. Amara sat on the edge of the bed, her hands resting on her stomach. She whispered softly to her unborn child, unsure of what tomorrow would bring. Outside, the mansion remained quiet, but something had already begun to shift inside its walls. And neither Amara nor Damian fully understood how deeply their lives had already started changing. The night inside the Cole mansion felt strangely still after Amara was shown to her room. The silence was nothing like the silence of the streets she once knew. This silence felt expensive, controlled, almost unnatural in its perfection. Amara sat on the edge of the soft bed, unsure how to relax her body. The mattress alone felt like something she had no right to touch. Her hands rested gently over her stomach as she tried to steady her breathing. For the first time in months, she was not afraid of rain or danger outside. Yet a different kind of fear lived inside her now. Fear of kindness she could not understand. Fear of a life that changed too quickly. Outside her room, the mansion remained quiet, but Damian Cole was still awake. He stood alone in his study, staring at documents he was no longer reading. His mind kept returning to the woman he had brought into his home. Something about her refusal to keep the wallet disturbed him deeply. Not because of loss, but because of intention. People around him always wanted something. Yet Amara had wanted nothing but to return what was not hers. That fact refused to leave his thoughts. Damian leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face slowly. It had been years since anything interrupted his emotional distance like this. Years since anything made him feel unsure. A knock interrupted his thoughts. His assistant entered carefully, holding a tablet. Sir, the arrangements for Miss Amara are complete. Damian nodded without looking up. Make sure she has everything she needs. The assistant hesitated slightly before speaking again. Sir, may I ask, who is she? Damian paused for a moment, a long moment. Someone who did the right thing, he finally said. The assistant nodded and quietly left the room. Damian remained alone again, but his thoughts only deepened. Meanwhile, upstairs, Amara slowly lay down on the bed. The softness made her almost emotional in a way she could not explain. She turned slightly, staring at the ceiling. Her life had changed direction in less than a single day. Yesterday she was invisible. Today she was inside a mansion belonging to a billionaire. She gently placed her hand on her stomach. We are safe tonight, she whispered softly. The baby moved slightly in response. A faint smile appeared on her lips, tired but real. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe without fear. Downstairs, Damian finally stood and walked toward the large windows of his study. Rain slid down the glass in slow patterns, matching his restless thoughts. He remembered the way Amara looked at the wallet. Not greed, not hesitation, only honesty. That kind of integrity was rare in his world, almost extinct. He closed his eyes briefly, remembering his late wife. Isabella had once believed in people like that, people who did the right thing even when no one was watching. Damian exhaled slowly. Something about Amara reminded him of that forgotten belief, but he quickly pushed the thought away. Feelings like that were dangerous. After everything he lost, he could not afford to feel again. Upstairs, Amara slowly drifted toward sleep, but her mind kept replaying everything. The storm, the wallet, the hotel lights. Damian's voice, his jacket on her shoulders. It all felt unreal, like stepping into someone else's life by mistake. Yet her body, tired and heavy, finally surrendered to sleep. The mansion remained quiet through the night, but it was no longer empty in meaning. Something had entered its walls that could not be ignored. Not wealth, not power, but change. And neither Amara nor Damian realized how irreversible that change would become. Morning arrived gently over the Cole mansion, spilling soft light across vast marble floors. Outside, Lagos was already awake, but inside the estate everything felt calm and distant from the city's chaos. Amara woke slowly in the large guest room, her body still adjusting to unfamiliar comfort. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The silence felt too peaceful to be real. Then memory returned in fragments. The storm, the hotel, Damian Cole, the mansion. She placed a hand over her stomach, grounding herself in reality. The baby shifted gently, and relief softened her expression. She was still here, still safe. A soft knock came at the door. Amara tensed slightly before answering. "Come in." A middle-aged housekeeper entered with careful politeness, carrying fresh clothes and warm tea. "Good morning, miss. I brought these for you." Amara hesitated at the word miss, still unused to being addressed with respect. "Thank you," she said softly. The housekeeper smiled briefly before leaving the room. Amara sat up slowly and looked at the clothes placed neatly on the chair. Clean fabric, soft colors, nothing like the worn clothes she had been surviving in. She changed carefully, feeling strangely emotional as she touched each item. For the first time in a long while, she did not feel invisible. Downstairs, Damian was already awake and working in his study. Papers were spread across his desk, but his focus kept breaking. He had slept little. His thoughts kept drifting back to the woman upstairs. Not just her situation, but her presence. There was something steady about her honesty that unsettled him. He pressed his fingers against his temple, trying to regain focus. A knock interrupted him again. His assistant entered quietly. "Sir, she is awake." Damian nodded without looking up. "And?" "She seems fine, sir." Quiet, but calm. Damian paused for a moment. Calm, that was not the word he expected. He stood slowly. "I will see her." Upstairs, Amara stood near the window of her room, watching the gardens outside. The estate looked peaceful under the morning light, almost untouched by reality. She felt like she was observing someone else's life from a distance. The door opened behind her. She turned quickly. Damian stood there, dressed in a simple dark shirt, looking more human than she remembered from the night before. "Did you sleep?" he asked. Amara nodded slightly. "Yes." "Good." A short silence followed. It was not uncomfortable, but unfamiliar. Amara looked down briefly before speaking. "I did not expect any of this." Damian studied her carefully. "Neither did I." That answer surprised her. She looked up at him again. "Why did you bring me here?" Damian hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Because you needed help," he said again. Amara shook her head slightly. "People do not usually help strangers like this." Damian's expression tightened faintly, as if he understood more than he wanted to admit. Maybe they should. The words hung between them quietly. Outside, sunlight moved slowly across the room, softening everything it touched. Amara placed her hand gently on her stomach again. "I do not know what happens next," she admitted. Damian nodded slowly. "We figure it out." There was no promise in his voice, only certainty in the moment. A staff member appeared at the door, informing them breakfast was ready. Damian gestured for Amara to follow. She hesitated for a second before stepping out of the room. As they walked through the mansion corridors, Amara noticed how large and empty the space still felt. Beautiful, but missing something she could not name. At the dining area, food was already prepared. Fresh, warm, carefully arranged. Amara sat slowly, still unsure of her place. Damian sat across from her, watching quietly but not intruding. "Eat," he said simply. Amara nodded and began slowly. Unlike the previous night, she no longer ate with desperation. Now there was awareness, caution, even disbelief. Damian observed her in silence, as if trying to understand something he could not easily define. After a few moments, he spoke. "You do not trust this, do you?" Amara paused slightly. "It is not that I do not trust it. It is just unfamiliar." Damian nodded once, understanding without needing explanation. Outside, life continued beyond the gates of the mansion, but inside this moment, everything felt suspended. Two people from completely different worlds sat across from each other, connected by something neither fully understood yet. And slowly, without either of them realizing it, the foundation of something irreversible was beginning to form. The morning air inside the Cole mansion felt different after breakfast, as if something subtle had shifted between Amara and Damian. The silence was no longer heavy or unfamiliar. It had started to feel like a space where understanding might slowly grow. Amara remained seated at the dining table even after finishing her meal. She looked down at her hands, still adjusting to the reality of clean surroundings and steady food. Damian stayed across from her, quietly observing without making her uncomfortable. For him, silence had always been normal, but with her present, it felt different. Not empty, but uncertain in a way he could not ignore. Amara finally broke the quiet. "I do not want to be a burden here." Damian looked up immediately. "You are not." Her eyes flickered with doubt. People do not usually bring strangers into their homes without expecting something. Damian leaned back slightly, considering her words. "I am not most people." That answer made her pause. She studied him carefully, trying to understand what kind of man he really was beneath the surface. Outside the dining room, staff moved quietly through their routines, but no one disturbed them. The mansion remained respectful, almost as if it understood the importance of the moment. Amara placed her hands gently over her stomach. "I do not know how long I can stay like this," she admitted softly. Damian's expression tightened slightly, not with anger, but with thought. "You are not being kept here," he said calmly. "You are being given a place to recover." The words were simple, but they carried weight she had not expected. Recovery, a concept she had not allowed herself to consider in a long time. Amara nodded slowly, though uncertainty remained in her eyes. Damian stood after a moment and walked toward the window. Outside, the garden stretched wide under soft morning light. Everything looked perfect, but his expression remained distant. "You should not think about what you owe," he said without turning back. Amara looked at him quietly. "Then what should I think about?" Damian paused briefly, surviving first. "Everything else comes later." His honesty surprised her again. There were no promises of a perfect future, only reality spoken clearly. A housekeeper entered briefly to clear the table, glancing at Amara with curiosity she quickly hid. Amara noticed, but did not react. She was used to being watched like that. When the staff left, silence returned. Damian turned back toward her. "There is something else," he said. Amara looked up. "You need medical care, regular checkups. The pregnancy is too far along to ignore." She instinctively placed her hand over her stomach again. "I cannot afford that," she said quietly. "You do not need to," Damian replied. The words were firm, final, and without room for argument. Amara stared at him, trying to process how easily he made decisions that felt impossible in her world. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again, softer this time. Damian held her gaze for a long moment. "Because I can," he said simply. That answer should have felt empty, but instead it felt honest. Amara looked away, overwhelmed by emotions she did not fully understand. Gratitude, fear, confusion, and something else she was not ready to name. Later that morning, Damian arranged for a doctor to visit the mansion. Amara protested at first, uncomfortable with being the center of attention again, but he did not argue with her directly. He simply ensured it happened. The doctor arrived quietly, respectful of the environment. After a full examination, he confirmed the baby was healthy, though Amara needed rest and proper nutrition. Damian listened carefully without interrupting. Amara sat quietly during the entire process, still adjusting to the idea that her health mattered to someone else. After the doctor left, she remained seated in the same place for a long time. Damian noticed her silence. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Amara hesitated before answering. "That this does not feel real." Damian nodded slightly. "It is real." She gave a faint, uncertain smile. That might be the scariest part. For the first time, a brief hint of understanding passed between them that did not need further explanation. Outside, the world continued as always, but inside the mansion, something was beginning to form slowly and quietly, built not on certainty, but on shared uncertainty and fragile trust. By the eighth morning inside the Cole mansion, Amara had begun to notice subtle changes in her daily life. The fear that once clung tightly to her chest was still present, but it no longer controlled every breath she took. The room she stayed in no longer felt like a temporary illusion. It was becoming familiar in a quiet, unsettling way. Outside her window, sunlight stretched across the perfectly maintained gardens, creating a calm contrast to her previous life on the streets. She placed her hand over her stomach and felt the steady movement of her baby, grounding her in the present moment. Downstairs, Damian was already awake, standing in his study as usual, surrounded by documents and silence. But his attention was no longer fully on work. It kept drifting, unexpectedly, toward Amara. That unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. He had spent years building emotional distance from people, and especially after loss. Yet somehow, this woman had crossed that distance without forcing it open. He closed a file slowly, realizing he had read the same line multiple times without understanding it. A knock interrupted his thoughts. His assistant entered carefully. "Sir, Miss Amara is awake." Damian nodded. "Has she eaten?" "Yes, sir. Light breakfast only." Damian stood after a brief pause. "I will see her." Upstairs, Amara was sitting near the window again, watching the light shift across the garden paths. She was no longer dressed in borrowed uncertainty. The clothes she wore now were simple but clean, chosen carefully by the staff. Yet she still felt like she did not fully belong. The door opened quietly behind her. She turned slightly and saw Damian enter. "You are up early," he said. Amara gave a small nod. "I could not sleep much." Damian stepped further into the room. Not rushing, not imposing. "Is something wrong?" She hesitated. "No, just thinking too much." "That is usually the problem," he replied calmly. A faint, almost reluctant smile touched her lips. Damian noticed it but did not comment. Instead, he leaned lightly against the edge of a nearby chair. "You should not overthink your situation here." Amara looked at him directly. "That is easy to say when your world makes sense." Damian paused at that, acknowledging the truth in her words. "My world does not always make sense," he said quietly. "It only looks like it does from the outside." That honesty surprised her. She studied him more carefully now, seeing cracks beneath the control he always carried. There was something human in the way he spoke, something he rarely showed to others. Amara shifted slightly in her seat. "I still do not understand why you are helping me." Damian did not answer immediately. He looked toward the window for a moment before responding. "Because ignoring you would have been easier, but wrong." The simplicity of that answer stayed in the air between them. Amara lowered her gaze, unsure how to respond. For someone like her, kindness always came with hidden conditions. But with Damian, there were none she could see. A staff member knocked and entered briefly, announcing breakfast in the dining room. Damian nodded and gestured for Amara to follow him. She hesitated for a second before standing. As they walked through the long corridors, Amara noticed details she had missed before: family photographs in some hallways, empty spaces that felt like memories that had not fully disappeared, a home that was beautiful but quietly incomplete. At the dining table, breakfast was already prepared. Damian sat opposite her again, as he had the previous day. The familiarity of the arrangement made Amara slightly more comfortable this time. "Eat," he said simply. Amara nodded and began slowly. Damian watched her for a moment before speaking again. "You are quieter today." Amara paused. "I am still trying to understand everything." "That is fair," he replied. Silence followed again, but it no longer felt tense. It felt like space being given instead of distance being imposed. Amara finally spoke after a long pause. "In my life before all of this, I never imagined something like this would happen." Damian looked at her. "Something like what?" "This," she said softly. "Being here. Being treated like I matter." The words carried more weight than she intended. Damian's expression softened slightly, though he did not interrupt her. "I am not used to it," she added. Damian leaned back slightly. "Neither are most people who deserve it." That response stayed with her longer than expected. Outside, the world beyond the mansion continued as usual, unaware of the quiet shift happening inside. But within these walls, something subtle and irreversible was beginning to take shape. built slowly through honesty, silence, and unexpected understanding between two lives that should never have crossed paths. The mansion felt quieter than usual that morning, as if the entire estate was holding its breath. Amara stood near the large window in her room, watching sunlight stretch slowly across the gardens. Her life no longer felt like the endless survival she once knew on the streets. Yet it still felt fragile, like something that could disappear without warning. She gently placed her hand over her stomach, feeling the steady movement of her baby. That small life was now the only thing that made everything feel real. Downstairs, Damian moved through his study with quiet focus, though his attention kept drifting away from work. Documents remained open on his desk, but none of them held his full concentration. His thoughts returned again and again to Amara, not out of obligation, but something he did not yet have words for. A knock interrupted him. His assistant entered respectfully. "Sir, Miss Amara has not come downstairs yet this morning." Damian nodded slowly. "I will check on her." Upstairs, Amara was still by the window when she heard the door open behind her. She turned and saw Damian step inside. "You are not eating breakfast," he said calmly. Amara gave a small, uncertain shrug. "I was not very hungry." Damian studied her for a moment, then spoke more firmly. "That is not a choice you should be making right now." She looked down slightly, used to being told to ignore her own needs. "I am fine," she said softly. "You are not just you anymore," Damian replied. The words made her pause. She looked up at him, confused. "What does that mean?" "It means you are responsible for two lives now," he said gently. A silence followed, heavier than before, but not uncomfortable. Amara slowly sat down on the edge of the bed. "No one has ever spoken to me like this before," she admitted. Damian leaned against the wall, arms crossed lightly. "Maybe no one ever should have let you go so long without care." The honesty in his voice unsettled her. It was not pity. It was something more grounded, more real. A knock came again, and a housekeeper announced breakfast was ready. Damian gestured for her to follow him downstairs. The walk through the mansion felt different this time. Amara noticed details she had overlooked before, framed photographs along the hallways, quiet, empty spaces that suggested memories that no longer lived here. At the dining table, food was already arranged neatly. Damian sat across from her again, as if it had become routine. "Eat," he said simply. Amara nodded and began slowly. This time, she was more aware of her surroundings, less overwhelmed. Damian watched her quietly for a moment. "You are thinking too much again," he said. Amara gave a faint smile. "It is hard not to." Damian nodded slightly, understanding without needing explanation. After a pause, she spoke again. "I keep waiting for this to feel like it is not real." Damian looked at her directly. "It is real." That simplicity made her chest tighten. She lowered her gaze briefly. "In my life, good things usually do not stay," she admitted. Damian was silent for a moment before responding. "Then maybe it is time something stayed." The words lingered between them longer than expected. Amara did not know how to respond. Outside, the world continued moving beyond the mansion gates, unaware of the quiet shift taking place inside. But within these walls, something was slowly forming that neither of them fully understood yet. Something built not on certainty, but on presence, honesty, and the beginning of trust. By the 10th morning, life inside the Cole mansion had developed a strange rhythm that neither Amara nor Damian could fully explain. It no longer felt like she was simply a guest, yet it also did not feel like she belonged completely. She existed somewhere between uncertainty and acceptance. Amara woke slowly, one hand resting instinctively on her stomach. The baby moved gently, a quiet reminder that her life was no longer only her own. She sat up and looked around the room. The luxury no longer felt as overwhelming as it once had, but it still felt unfamiliar. Downstairs, Damian was already in his study, though his attention was not fully on the documents in front of him. His assistant stood nearby, speaking softly. "Sir, Miss Amara has been resting more than usual this morning." Damian looked up immediately. "Is she all right?" The assistant nodded. "Yes, sir, just tired." Damian paused for a moment before closing the file in front of him. "I will see her." Upstairs, Amara was sitting by the window when he entered. She looked calmer than before, but there was still something distant in her expression. "You are not sleeping well," Damian said as he stepped inside. Amara turned slightly. "It is not sleep, it is thoughts." Damian nodded once, understanding more than she expected. "About the future," she added softly. Damian leaned against the wall near her. "The future is not something you need to solve today." Amara gave a faint, tired smile. "That is easy to say when you have control over yours." Damian did not respond immediately. The truth in her words was sharp, but not wrong. "I do not always feel in control," he admitted quietly. That surprised her. She looked at him more closely now, noticing how different he seemed when he was not performing authority. There was something human beneath the structure he carried every day. Amara shifted slightly. "I never imagined I would be here," she said. Damian watched her carefully. "Here," he repeated. "In a place like this." She nodded. "Being taken care of." Damian's expression softened slightly. "You should have been taken care of long before now." The words lingered between them. Amara looked down, unsure how to respond to kindness that felt so direct. After a pause, Damian spoke again. "You need to walk a little today. Fresh air will help." Amara hesitated. "Outside? Yes," he said simply. "It is still part of your world too." A short silence followed before she finally nodded. Later that morning, they walked through the mansion gardens. The air was softer outside, filled with the quiet sounds of nature instead of enclosed silence. Amara moved slowly, careful with every step. Damian stayed beside her without rushing her pace. For a while, neither of them spoke. It was not necessary. The quiet between them felt different now, less like distance and more like understanding. Amara finally broke the silence. "Do you ever regret it?" Damian glanced at her. "Regret what?" "Bringing me here." He stopped walking for a moment. "No," he said firmly. That answer surprised her. She looked at him, searching for hesitation, but found none. "Why not?" she asked quietly. Damian looked ahead at the garden before answering. "Because for the first time in a long time, this house feels less empty." The words carried more weight than he intended. Amara felt something shift inside her chest, though she did not respond immediately. A soft breeze moved through the trees around them. Damian continued walking slowly. "You do not have to understand everything right now," he said. Amara nodded slightly. "I am trying. That is enough," he replied. As they reached the end of the garden path, Amara paused for a moment, looking back at the mansion behind them. It no longer looked like a prison of wealth or a dream she did not belong in. It looked like a place where something new was quietly beginning, and inside both of them, without any clear explanation, something unfamiliar continued to grow, fragile but undeniable, shaped by time, silence, and the first signs of trust. By the 11th phase of her life inside the Cole mansion, Amara no longer woke up in fear. But she also did not wake up in full peace. Instead, she lived in a fragile space between safety and uncertainty. Each morning felt like a quiet question she did not yet know how to answer. That morning, sunlight poured gently through the curtains of her room. She sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, placing her hand over her stomach. The baby moved softly, steady and alive. It was the one certainty she trusted completely. Downstairs, Damian was already awake, but his routine had changed in ways he did not fully admit to himself. Work no longer consumed every thought. There were pauses now, moments where his mind drifted elsewhere. Often, it drifted to Amara. He stood in his study, staring at a document without reading it. His assistant waited quietly at the door. "Sir, Miss Amara is awake." Damian closed the file slowly. "I will see her." Upstairs, Amara was by the window when he entered. She turned slightly as he stepped inside. "You are up early again," he said. "I did not sleep deeply," she replied. Damian nodded once. "Something on your mind?" Amara hesitated. "Everything feels temporary," she admitted. "Even this." Damian studied her for a moment. "Why do you think that?" "Because my life has always been temporary things," she said quietly. "Nothing ever stayed." Damian did not interrupt her. He let the words sit between them. After a pause, he spoke. "Then, maybe this is the first thing that does not follow that pattern." Amara looked at him carefully. "You really believe that?" Damian did not answer immediately. "I do not say things I do not believe," he said finally. The honesty in his tone made her look away briefly. It was difficult for her to accept stability. It was something her life had never offered her before. A knock came at the door. "Breakfast is ready," a staff member announced. Damian gestured gently for her to follow him. As they walked through the mansion, Amara noticed something different in her own steps. She was no longer walking like someone who did not belong. She was simply walking. At the dining table, everything was arranged as it had become familiar now. Damian sat across from her. "Eat," he said calmly. Amara nodded and began. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was structured, almost comfortable. After a few moments, Damian spoke. "You are thinking too much again." Amara gave a faint smile. "I cannot seem to stop." "About the future?" he asked. She nodded slightly. Damian leaned back in his chair. "The future does not need to be solved all at once." Amara looked at him. "That is easy for you to say." Damian met her gaze. "It is not always easy for me either." That surprised her. She studied him quietly, noticing something different in the way he spoke today. Less guarded, more present. Amara placed her hands gently together. "I never thought my life would change like this," she said softly. Damian nodded. "Neither did I." The words were simple, but they carried weight. A pause followed. Then Damian spoke again. "You should rest more today." Amara frowned slightly. "I rest too much already." He shook his head. "You are carrying another life. Rest is not optional." There was no argument in his tone, only certainty. Amara looked down, accepting it quietly. After breakfast, Damian suggested a walk again. This time, she agreed without hesitation. Outside, the garden felt alive under soft morning light. Flowers moved gently with the wind. The air felt lighter than inside the mansion. They walked side by side at a slow pace. No urgency, no pressure, just movement. After a while, Amara spoke. "Do you ever feel like your life is too controlled?" Damian looked ahead. "Every day." That answer surprised her again. "Then why keep it that way?" she asked. Damian paused before responding. "Because control is easier than loss." The words carried a history she did not fully know. Amara nodded slowly, understanding more than she said. They continued walking in silence. It was not empty anymore. It was shared. Eventually, Damian spoke again. "This place feels different with you here." Amara glanced at him. "Different how?" "Less empty," he said simply. She did not respond immediately. The honesty of it stayed between them. As they reached the end of the garden path, Amara stopped for a moment. She looked back at the mansion behind them. It no longer felt like a place she was surviving inside. It felt like a place she was slowly becoming part of, even if she did not fully understand how. And beside her, Damian stood quietly, also looking forward at something neither of them could clearly define yet, but both were beginning to feel in different ways. The morning light over the Cole mansion felt different on the 12th day of Amara's life inside its walls. It no longer felt like she was passing through a strange world. It felt like she had quietly become part of it, even if she still did not fully understand how. She stood by the window in her room, one hand resting gently over her stomach. The baby moved softly, reminding her again that nothing about her life could ever return to what it once was. Downstairs, Damian was already awake, but something about him felt different today as well. He was not buried in work like before. He was standing by the window in his study, but his thoughts were not on business. They were on Amara. He had stopped pretending that her presence did not affect him. A knock came at the door. His assistant entered quietly. "Sir, Miss Amara is awake." Damian nodded once. "I know, I will see her." Upstairs, Amara was still near the window when he entered her room. There was no tension in the air anymore, only quiet awareness. "You are thinking again," Damian said gently. Amara gave a small smile. "I think I have been thinking since the day I arrived." Damian stepped closer, but not too close. "That is not necessarily a bad thing," he said. Amara looked at him. "It feels dangerous sometimes." Damian nodded slowly. "Because change always feels like that at first." She looked down briefly, then back at him. "I never thought I would feel safe again." The honesty in her voice lingered in the room. Damian did not respond immediately. Instead, he studied her quietly. "You are safe here," he said finally. Amara hesitated. "I know, but I do not know how long it will last." Damian's expression tightened slightly, not with anger, but with something deeper. "Not everything is temporary," he said. Amara looked at him carefully. "You say that like you are trying to convince yourself too." The words surprised him. For a moment, he did not answer. Then he gave a faint, almost tired smile. "Maybe I am." A silence followed, but it was no longer uncomfortable. It was honest, real. Damian looked away toward the window. "This house used to feel completely empty," he said quietly. Amara listened without interrupting. "Now it does not," he added. Amara felt something shift inside her chest. She looked down at her hands, unsure how to hold that kind of truth. A housekeeper knocked and announced breakfast again, breaking the moment gently. Damian gestured for her to follow him downstairs. As they walked through the long corridors, Amara noticed she was no longer walking like a stranger. Her steps were slower, more certain. The mansion no longer felt like something she was observing from the outside. It felt like something she was slowly living inside. At the dining table, they sat opposite each other as usual. "Eat," Damian said calmly. Amara nodded and began. The silence between them had changed over time. It was no longer filled with uncertainty or fear. It had become something closer to understanding. After a while, Damian spoke. "You are no longer the same as when you arrived." Amara paused slightly. "I do not know what I am becoming." Damian looked at her. "Neither do I." That answer should have been unsettling, but instead it felt honest. Outside, the world continued as always, beyond the mansion gates. But inside, something irreversible had taken shape. Not loud, not dramatic. Just steady change, built quietly between two lives that had crossed paths in a storm and never fully returned to who they were before it.